the Moneyweb Crypto Podcast, where we discuss all things crypto related. Your host, Kieran Ryan.
Crypto wrench attacks appear to be a new threat in the crypto world. Now, crypto crime is usually associated with hackers and online scams, stolen passwords, things like that. But criminals are increasingly bypassing digital security altogether and targeting the person holding the crypto. Blockchain analytics firm Chainalysis estimates that more than $30 million was stolen through violent crypto attacks in the first part of 2026. Now, these so-called wrench attacks, they include kidnappings, home invasions, hostage situations, where victims are forced to surrender passwords or transfer their assets. Just imagine that. Now, if this trend continues, 2026 could surpass last year's record of $58 million that were stolen in these wrench attacks. Now, joining us to unpack the findings and to examine the rapid growth of stablecoins and institutional crypto across Africa is Philip Adiyama of blockchain analytics firm Chainalysis. Hi, Philip. Thanks very much for joining us on the Moneyweb Crypto Podcast. Let's talk about the wrench attack. Now, this is a term that a lot of our listeners won't know. What exactly is it? And perhaps before you do that, just tell us, what is Chainalysis?
Hi, Kieran. Thank you. Hi to your audience. So Chainalysis is a blockchain data platform. We make it easy to connect the movement of digital assets to real-world services and entities. Powered by deep blockchain data and AI, various organizations across the public and the private sector are able to investigate illicit activities, manage risk exposures to their businesses, and also develop innovative market solutions using various Chainalysis solutions and services. Now, Chainalysis, our mission is to build trust in blockchains, blending both the safety and the security of this technology. Now, thank you for the question regarding crypto wrench attacks. And this was actually in our recently released mid-year crime report. Typically, a wrench attack is usually when you have an individual or an organization using violence or the threat of violence to force cryptocurrency holders to hand over their assets to these individuals. So, for instance, if you are coerced or forced to unlock your wallet infrastructure, make transactions to specific crypto addresses that are controlled by these individuals under duress. Now, I think in practice, as you've mentioned, wrench attacks usually include home invasions, kidnapping, and also hostage situations. And looking forward to unpack this in today's discussion.
All right. So Chainalysis is involved in helping law enforcement, I think, around the world in chasing down stolen funds. So you can do this because the blockchain is very transparent. And we know that the FBI and various law enforcement agencies, they're able to actually monitor some of these wallet addresses where funds have been stolen. I guess the question I have then would be, if more than $30 million was stolen through these violent crypto attacks so far this year, but only 12 of the 46 documented cases resulted in a payment. Why are these attacks becoming more frequently but apparently less successful?
Yeah, so I think maybe touching a bit on the term wrench attack. So usually this is well known in the security space or in the security concept. We usually say that no matter how strong your encryption or your digital security is, someone can potentially always bypass it by physically having access or threatening the person that has access to their assets. Now, again, in the report, what is more concerning is that we are seeing this becoming even more significant. As you've rightly mentioned, globally, the value stolen through these various types of wrench attacks, I think in 2025, according to our report, reached a peak of roughly $58 million. That's in rand, around roughly 491 million rand. However, in 2026, again, we are already at roughly 30 million. Home invasions account for roughly 37% of these incidents that have been documented. And I think it's also important to stress that these data and this fact, these are the reported cases that Chainalysis has. So I think we'll touch a bit into the other cases as well. Now, we always say that as crypto becomes more valuable and more widely held, criminals are always looking beyond the technology itself. So they are increasingly targeting people behind the wallets, people who control these addresses, which means that security needs to consider not just the digital protection, but also you need to go into the physical and also the personal security as well. Regarding your question in terms of having roughly 12 out of 46 documented attacks result in payment, which is more of like a decline over the past years. Well, I think the most important thing to understand is that the fact that there's an increase in the attacks, it doesn't necessarily mean that these criminals or these illicit actors are becoming more successful. In fact, what our data shows is actually the opposite. So a huge part of the decline in the success rate usually appears to have been linked to a growing number of cases in France, which I believe would hopefully touch on a bit later on. So there was a compromise on the French tax agency's records, which significantly expanded the pool of these potential attacks that criminals are targeting. Now, you can also see that there's a clear shift in the numbers. So before 2025, France had only recorded just about a handful of these known crypto-related violent incidents. However, that jumped to 19 in 2025, and by the end of 2026, there were already about 30 publicly known incidents. I think the key takeaway here is the fact that the volume of these attacks are increasing. However, the data doesn't necessarily suggest that the attackers are actually getting any better at converting these assets into, or these attacks into, successful payment. In fact, the growing number of broader, less targeted attacks appear to be contributing to the much lower success rate as compared to the highly intelligence-driven, sophisticated attacks that have a much more higher success rate.
Yeah, what I'm interested to hear from you is, how are these people being targeted? I mean, people who are known to have crypto, they would probably be fairly private about that. They would keep that to themselves. So somebody's got inside information. There's a person here who's got crypto. So the way we're going to get it out of him is we're going to invade their home. We're going to put a gun to their heads and we're going to force them to hand over the passwords. And the people who are doing this would obviously know how to access those passwords and move the funds from one wallet to another, right? So there's got to be some inside intelligence. Does your research show anything about that? How are people getting this information?
You're actually right. It's best practice in the industry. We always say that you have to make sure your OPSEC is quite strong. We don't really encourage people speaking at conferences or writing on social media posts of the amount of crypto that they hold. It's the same way as you don't really walk around with shirts or with caps writing how much money you have in your bank account. However, this particular increase in range attacks, there's specific data behind it. So we believe that roughly there was a data breach. This has been announced as well. There was a data breach that is probably linked to these cases, as we are seeing an increase in France. So in 2024, there was a case involving a French tax official in the Greater Paris area who was alleged to have stolen and sold some official documents on high net worth crypto holders that were with the French tax authority. Now, these documents were then sold to specific criminal intermediaries, and I think that is when we started to see a breakout of these range attacks. It also highlights how important operational security is for crypto holders. I remember there used to be people who would advise that, well, when you are buying things like a hardware device, you probably shouldn't use your home address and others. I think one other thing also is that it's not really just about securing your wallet or your private keys anymore. You also need to think carefully about how people publicly disclose if even they hold any crypto at all, or where and how they store these assets that they hold, and how easily these on-chain activities can be linked back to your real-world identities. I think one of the concerning trends is that attackers aren't necessarily targeting crypto holders directly. They are actually expanding the target list. So, increasing. We've had cases where family members or associates of these crypto holders have been held. And I mean, as we will discuss, we have cases such as kidnappings and home invasions as well. These people are being pressured to make payments for the release of their associates and also their loved ones. Yeah.
It's concerning that you have a tax official in France who leaked home addresses or personal information of people. This becomes very relevant in South Africa, where there's discussion now about the disclosure levels required for crypto holders, where you could be crossing a border and a border official might say, okay, so you've got some crypto, you need to give us your password to your wallet. And this is one of the things people who are opposed to this are saying is exactly that type of situation could arise, where you have an official who leaks this information or is part of a syndicate. Now, in your report that you've just brought out about these ranch attacks, it seems there are different levels of criminals operate. There's amateurs who's sending stolen funds directly to exchanges. There's organized networks that are using bridges and decentralized exchanges, and specialist laundering services. So the question is, how much can investigators still see once the funds start moving across these different blockchains? What are the realistic prospects of freezing or recovering the money?
Let's take the three types of I'll call it the three types of attackers, or the kinds of attackers that we have in this, in particularly when it comes to these particular cases. So the first type is those that I would call the unsophisticated, or largely the crypto unaware group. The second group being a bit more sophisticated, or the crypto aware, and also the last group being, I'll call it a bit more highly sophisticated, or more of like the criminally organized group. So the first group, they would tend to directly transfer these funds straight to centralized exchanges, right, with no forms of obfuscation. Now, they mostly just treat crypto as just another form of way to extract value. Now, this is very easy for law enforcement and various crypto exchanges to be able to trace and investigate this group. In most cases, once the right legal documents are presented, these exchanges can then freeze funds and go through the possible process of recovery with for the victim. So for this first group, it's relatively easier with the right data and also the right technology. Now, for the second group, again, these are mostly more of like mid-tier attackers. So they would largely use centralized exchanges, cross-chain bridges, MEV bots, and other forms of DeFi applications to swap funds and move funds across various blockchains. Again, with the right tools and also the right understanding of these methods, it's relatively easier for various compliance teams and also various law enforcement agencies to investigate these cases. I think the most concerning is the third group, where these attackers appear more sophisticated. I'll call it more organized and embedded within a bit more larger criminal networks. So again, on-chain analysis is able to reveal the flow of funds connecting these groups to various laundering services and all that. Now, as well, to your question, what we've noticed is as criminals become more sophisticated, again, most people tend to use, I'll call it the type 2 and the type 3, which is these DeFi applications such as bridges, decentralized exchanges, and also the specialized laundering services, right, to make the flow of funds even more harder. Now, it doesn't really mean, as I've indicated before, it doesn't really mean that these investigators are able to lose visibility. It just makes investigations a bit more complex, and then it requires the ability to connect activity across different types of blockchains and services that are being used to hide the sources of the funds. But the most important thing is the technologies, the data is there to support various agencies that would work on cases like this to understand actually what is happening. Now, as to the point of recovery, one key thing we always indicate is that the sooner these stolen funds are identified and the sooner the right parties are alerted, the much higher the chances of, one, freezing the funds, and also two, possible recovery of these funds. Once these funds have been moved through multiple layers, being converted or reached jurisdictions where, in some cases, it's difficult for cooperation to be, recovery becomes even more difficult. So if there's anyone out there who unfortunately falls victim to an incident like this, the sooner these cases are reported to the right authorities and also get to the right, I'll call it the right parties involved, including some of these crypto exchanges, the much higher the chances of recovery. Yeah.
Right. So somebody who's in a situation like that where funds have been stolen, what's the first thing they should do? Go to the police and file a report?
I think the absolute first thing is to reach out to the local law enforcement agencies. That's the immediate thing to do.
Finally, Philip, let's just talk about Africa and stablecoin adoption. You're seeing pretty strong adoption in countries like Ghana, where you're from, and Nigeria. You mentioned that previously when we were talking that this was in the past, stablecoins were really being used for small retail transactions. But now it appears in Africa that institutions are getting very, very heavily involved in this. Give us a sense of the scale of the shift. What is driving this?
Previously, crypto used to move largely through remittance flows, speculation here and there. However, as I've been mentioning, crypto today is already in the mainstream. The industry is already in the financial mainstream. You are seeing large financial institutions, some of the oldest financial institutions globally and across the African region, exploring different products in the space, including stablecoins. You are seeing regulators across the region in one form or the other formalizing the space, be it from sandbox, direct licensing, accelerated licensing programs, and all that for these virtual asset players, formalizing the activity, bringing them in, being in a form of coordination with these players. Law enforcement agencies across the African region are actively using various blockchain intelligence and analysis platforms to investigate sophisticated criminal networks and sophisticated crime across the region. I mean, it shows that crypto is no longer operating on the fringes of the financial system, and that this industry is already mainstream. In terms of mainstream adoption, one key thing that we always indicate is that these mainstream adoption also comes with greater responsibility to be able to manage the risk. Now, the good news is that these regulations and the technologies are developing along with the growing market, right? So blockchain intelligence provides investigators a level of visibility into these transactions that simply, even as at now, does not exist in the traditional form of financial crime. Right? Again, because purely due to how open and transparent the technology is. And also, when these blockchain intelligence is combined with law enforcement corporations, these are quite powerful. I think the challenge is that criminals are also increasingly becoming a bit more sophisticated. And again, we always mention that the ability to investigate crime makes some of these public sector agencies more comfortable with the industry. I believe just yesterday, the Central Bank of Nigeria announced their sandbox as well for various forms of virtual asset service providers. We have a bill that was signed in Ghana last year. Some Ghanaian entities are already within the Ghanaian sandbox. In Kenya, there's also been a bill that was signed, I believe, last November. Various agencies in Kenya are also working on licensing these entities as well. We've seen movement in Mauritius as well. I think South Africa is far advanced in terms of its regulatory process. I believe all this is just indicating that this space is here to stay and that various players in this space are becoming more mature.
Right. And I suppose we should explain what a sandbox is. This is kind of this is where children go and play, right? It's something you do before you actually launch it into the public. It's a play box. Am I correct?
Yes, correct. So sandboxes are mainly more of like avenues where various types of operators in this space are allowed to test out products that they have in close coordination with regulators, allowed to, in a more controlled, I'll call it in a more controlled environment, test out services, products, engage in specific activities or business activities, all within a very closed environment. Now, various regulators use this approach so that they are easily able to understand the operations of these businesses Usually the idea of the sandbox is to run it for a specific duration. And then after that duration, once the participants within the sandbox are able to meet the requirements of the regulator, they are then given, I'll call it a bit more long-term licenses to operate within the country.
All right, we're going to leave it there. That was Philip Adiyama, who is the African representative for Chainalysis. Thank you very much for your time, Philip.
Thanks for listening to the Moneyweb Crypto Podcast, hosted by Kieran Ryan. To listen to our other podcasts, go to moneyweb.co.za or the Moneyweb app and follow Moneyweb News for daily updates.